So, forgive me for the interruption, but this program only allows 15-minute segments. Um, so I left off talking about the three disciplines that I use, and I wanted to say a few words about why I decided to use these three disciplines to um, study the phenomenon of consciousness. And the main reason that I did that is that what you have with philosophical definitions and with a philosophical approach is that all you are able to address is questions of substance reduction, free will. With a neurological approach, you were able to discuss the dry, deterministic function of biological structures and their correlates with various aspects of conscious experience. With existential theory, what you're able to do is discuss the modalities via which the psyche is able to address fears. So the shortcoming of philosophy is that it's not very well equipped to speak broadly and conceptually about the individual functional units of the psyche and the way in which these units are able to interact. So all philosophy tells you is, questions of free will and sort of pondering what reality is composed of, but it doesn't really tell you very much about the elements of the psyche and the constituents of the psyche. Your existential approach is able to tell you about, the very deep inner longings of humanity that causes a basic sense of anxiety and negatively influences the contents of the psyche. Neuroscience is able to tell you about biological functionality and the dry deterministic action of neurotransmitters, but again, it doesn't tell you very much about the lived human experience. It doesn't tell you anything about the experiential element of what it means to live and have a mind. So I want to move on by discussing a little bit about the basic problems or the basic sort of dichotomies within consciousness studies, and they include mind and body dualism, how the mind and body are separate types of things, and how they're able to interact. It's also questions of whether or not we have free will and intention, or if it's entirely biologically deterministic. So how is it that? Yeah. So those are the basic questions there. So the idea of epistemology, which is the study of knowing, how we come about, what's the criteria for knowing? How do we take knowledge in? How do we evaluate knowledge? What is spiritual knowledge? And that's something that I'll say a little bit more about when I get to altered states or non-ordinary states. There's a phrase that I use, the epistemology of the eyeballs. So, so the only thing that I know is what hits my retina and goes through the processing cascade, down to my chiasm and these different parts of my brain. That's how I come to access knowledge about the world. Anything beyond that, and you'll find me critiquing this and discussing this a bit in my written piece, is, if you're not using a biological epistemology, you're making a arbitrary selection from an infinite number of possibilities of the non-physical, the non-corporeal, and you do that in order to achieve to resolve crises and existentialism. And it's an arbitrary choice. There's no criteria to decide which is true. So there's some debate about physical knowing versus spiritual knowing? How do you decide which one is right? It's a question of, truths about the cosmos and what the cosmos is composed of. What is, where God exists in the cosmos and whether or not he exists in the cosmos. That is true, or whether or not you are in Seattle or Timbuktu or Florida or New Zealand. It doesn't matter where you are. The cosmos is the same cosmos, so we should be accessing the same knowledge about that cosmos no matter where you are. And yet we have this broad spectrum of religiosity. There shouldn't be such a spectrum if there's only one answer. So these are all interesting debates within the field. There's also a question about qualia. Qualia is the secondary, not secondary, it's what it's really like to experience some bit of sensory data about the world. What is it really like? So when you see the color of the shirt that I'm wearing, what is that experience like for you? And is it the same? I'll say more about that later. So there's several of these. So again, phenomenal knowing versus biological knowing versus. So phenomenal is sort of subjective, self-reported, linguistic. It's what people really tell you about what they're experiencing, and that has importance. That has tremendous importance. Or the radical material versus the emergent perspective. The radical material perspective says, there's only material things. The emergent perspective says that, the mind or consciousness is a higher order property of the brain that supervenes on neural activity and cannot be reduced to it. So it has some sort of power to supervene or to be higher than these lower level properties. So I want to say a few words about altered states, because in talking about our ability to heal, it's important to, and our ability to sort of try to access spiritual knowledge. Altered states is one way in which we attempt to do that. So I have a quote up here by William James about the importance that one of the founding fathers of psychology had placed on the importance of altered states. So this is the part where I will show a video recording of a question that I posed to Dr. Roth. So the idea behind altered states and the psyche and consciousness is that it's supposed to tell you something about sort of the natural movements of consciousness, and it does this by causing deeper parts of the psyche to be externalized and amplified. So you externalize and you amplify really deep parts of your mind. And the idea is that you have these deeper layers in your psyche, and those deeper layers cause you to return to a certain set of thoughts, or a set of thoughts that impact your daily psychic functioning. And we do this via the use of psychedelics or meditative practice. And it's an attempt to sort of heal yourself. And the question I pose here is, how do you tell the difference between chemically induced alterations in perception and verifiable data about spiritual truth? So, when my brain chemistry is altered by psychedelics, that's just alterations in brain chemistry. It's not real knowledge about anything spiritual. And what is it? And it comes down to that core question about what is spiritual knowledge. So moving along, I want to say a bit about methods that different disciplines use. So primarily philosophy is a discipline that uses language and it uses the construction of foundational premises and premises about about mind and about many different things. Existential methods use a similar linguistic frame, but it's more about creating more knowledge, more linguistic knowledge about some inner psychic state. Neuroscientific knowledge is more about rigorous and empirical observed laboratory data. So the idea of making a cross-disciplinary standard is to say that there are methods for making it rigorous. I mean, the instruments you use to extract qualitative data in heuristic research is there's a standard way of doing that. So I want to proceed by talking about one example of a particular philosophical argument. And I'll present more philosophical arguments when I talk about the spectrum of definitions within consciousness studies. So this word seritas, it refers to sort of stacking. And so in the written piece, I present this argument, which basically says, so the idea behind stacking is that you say, you take some concept that's vague, like richness, and you say if a person that has 1 penny is rich, then a person that has 2 pennies is rich. Therefore, a person that has two pennies is poor, rather. And then you just keep sort of stacking individual units, and at a certain point, clearly you don't have a rich person anymore. In this case, what I say is about mentation, and the argument I has is, if an individual that can mentally envision a triangle has consciousness, then an individual who can mentally envision a triangle and a hexagon possesses consciousness. Therefore, a person that can mentally envision a triangle and a hexagon possesses consciousness. So that's the first argument. And then you add, if an individual who can mentally envision a triangle and a hexagon, then an individual who can imagine a triangle, a hexagon, and a trapezoid possesses consciousness. Therefore, an individual who can mentally envision those 3 objects possesses consciousness, and you keep going on, and eventually you get to this point where you are far beyond the processing capabilities of the mind. You cannot imagine an infinite number of objects. And the point behind that is that there isn't a discrete point where you can express how many objects. You can't exactly quantify what we're able to mentally process or mentally envision. And that's one example of a philosophical approach. So in the written piece, I talk a bit about 3 sort of modes of healing. I'm going to say them briefly because I only have about 50 seconds before this recording is over. But I have a lot of support for this idea of how powerful mental properties are, and that mental properties have the ability to override biological properties. There's a lot of evidence from neuroplasticity, and there's one source I read that talked about a woman who was diagnosed with really debilitating temporal lobe epilepsy, and she was able to train herself and defy modern medicine and reverse her symptoms and heal herself in that way. And that was a really strong bit of evidence for